Hello, welcome to Musing Heavy, the site devoted to alternative reflections on hard rock and heavy metal. My name is Stephen Meyer, and today I'm going to present some information based on an essay I put together a couple months ago entitled, "Is it the music or the uniform?" And I guess what I'm arguing mostly in this particular paper is that when the heavy metal community puts too much emphasis on appearance, ultimately the music can suffer. All right. So this paper is broken up into two YouTube presentations. We're obviously doing part one, and you can check out part two. If you'd rather read the text version of this paper, follow the links and it'll take you to my website, and you can certainly do that. So let's dig into it. Is it the music or the uniform? The Metallica example. So we're going to look at the situation with Metallica to sort of help build this argument I'm trying to put together. Okay. I think the heavy metal audience, in my humble opinion, is exceptionally sophisticated in certain respects and admittedly a little shallow in other respects. So let me sort of start with that sort of notion and what I mean by that. So the heavy metal audience has always been a much deeper thinking community than often given credit. And I will defend that forever, right? Heavy metal is much more sophisticated, much more intelligent than a lot of people seem to understand. Sure, we like to rock out with those timeless riffs, but given the complexity of the music and the lyrics exhibited by many of heavy metal artists, serious scrutiny is necessary if you're going to totally get this, right? You've got to listen to the music often, many times, before you fully get it, right? Now, I build on that idea quite a bit, actually, in another essay where I talk about the importance of extreme music and heavy metal, right? So you can check that out if you want to sort of see how I build that thinking a little more as well. But I guess the point I'm making here is that heavy metal is far more sophisticated, the music that is, than is often given credit. And I think especially when you're looking at, not all heavy metal, but certainly metal that's more technical or tends to be more on the periphery, it takes a lot of effort to sort of get what a band is doing, a lot of listens. Everybody, assimilates music at different rates. But at least for me, I got to really dig into it before I get it. And moreover, the artists putting together this very complex pieces of music require a lot of intelligence and a lot of work to get there as well, right? And again, what would be great examples of heavy metal bands that are indeed very sophisticated? Prog metal bands are often, the poster children for sophistication in metal, if you like. So bands such as Dream Theater, Opeth, Fate's Warning, Porcupine Tree, Queensryche, Gojira, Rush, and many, many, many others. Those are just a few that just sort of naming off the top of my head, as it were. And also many bands in the subgenres of heavy metal, death metal, black metal, doom metal, symphonic metal, again, are really pushing the boundaries and offering some very, very sophisticated music, right? So in a nutshell, you have to be intelligent to understand the music, and you certainly have to be intelligent to create this music, right? Okay, in contrast, rock music, or just more general rock, you might say, is often a lot more immediate to the listener. And the closer a band gets to pop, the less thinking that is required, right? Now, again, I don't mean that as a put down. All music is good. If you like it, it's good. That's really the only rule, I think. And I'm certainly not saying that hard rock, or even soft rock for that matter, or punk, I love punk as well. I'm not saying that these bands are not cerebral. Many indeed are, okay? It's just that on average, one can enjoy the music more on mental autopilot, and digging deep is optional, okay? So that's sort of what I'm saying there. All right, so as I say, I will defend forever the sophistication and the intelligence that heavy metal has, especially by today's standards. However, Where I think heavy metal or metal fans in general have been comparatively shallow, at least historically, and probably still today to a degree, but I think this was certainly a problem, and I'm going to say why I think it's a problem coming up, where we have been a little bit more shallow is in appearance and fashion, right? And by shallow, I mean that little thinking was or is required regarding how one presents himself or herself to the outside world, right? Certainly throughout the 1980s and 1990s, consistency in dress with men in particular was a near prerequisite for both the bands and the audience, right? Women heavy metal fans were maybe a little more diverse and put a little more effort into their appearance, but with men, it was most of us looked quite a lot the same. The bands as well as many of the fans. So what was the typical heavy metal look? Leather jackets, typically, jeans, blue jeans, black jeans, but that was sort of the only colors we had, black and blue, basically. Running shoes were and are a big deal, especially high tops back in the day. The guys often had long hair, or if they didn't have long hair, they sort of went to the other extreme and shaved it all off. Black t-shirts, an absolute prerequisite. Patches on the jean jackets or caps, right? Displaying proudly many heavy metal and hard rock bands, right? I don't think a lot's changed today in sort of the fashion of heavy metal, other than probably the addition of elaborate tattoos and various piercings. But I don't really think that's specific to the heavy metal crowd. I think both tattoos and piercings have gone to very different, much wider array of fashion choices, whether you're a metal fan or not. So in a lot of ways, I think you could call this the heavy metal uniform, right? The leather jackets, the jeans, the black t-shirts showing band logos, right? The running shoes, high tops, especially long hair, typically, that sort of thing. And the uniform was worn whenever possible, right? Which usually meant for heavy metal fans, that usually meant any time outside of job responsibilities or various formal events. You probably couldn't wear the heavy metal uniform to a wedding, or at least most weddings, for example. Or you probably couldn't wear it to work, right? Maybe today you could a little bit, but certainly in the past, that probably wasn't going to cut it, right? So in your free time, you wore the uniform. Of course, when you went to a concert, then the heavy metal uniform was in full glory, right? And sometimes even embellished more with metal studs and chains, et cetera, right? And maybe you went all out if you went to a black metal concert, maybe even wore the corpse paint, right? Et cetera. Okay. Let's look at a couple examples of what I think most people understand what I mean by the metal uniform, right? But let's look at a couple examples nevertheless. So here we are, having a look at the band Exodus, amazing thrash metal band out of the Bay Area. And you can see the metal uniform is very much in display here. All the guys have quite long hair, right? Notice all kinds of black jackets, black leather jackets in particular, right? Lots of black t-shirts, often with band logos. Here's High on Fire. I think Gary Holt looks like he's wearing a Venom shirt here, which wouldn't be surprising given that Venom is an influence on Exodus, right? So great example of the metal uniform right there. All kind of looking the same in a way, right? Here's Creator, another amazing thrash band. This would probably be Coma Souls era, I think, right? But again, lots of long hair, lots of black t-shirts, lots of band t-shirts here by and large, right? Again, so you can kind of get an idea. Kind of looking the same, right? Kind of looking the same. Oh, yes, the great Pantera, featuring the late, great Abbott brothers, right? Again, well, Dimebag here is not wearing black, but again, note the long hair. The beard, actually, beards became pretty big in heavy metal as well. In fact, with time, Dimebag's beard got really, really long and he dyed it red, all kinds of things. This is long before people started dyeing. You know, now it's become mainstream, people dyeing their hair all kinds of cool colors. Dime was doing that really early. right? Phil Anselmo, again, sort of going the opposite. Phil didn't grow his hair really long. He typically shaved it or kept it really short. And also displaying, band logos, St. Vitus. Phil Ensemble was always really great at having T-shirts of more fringe bands. Great way to advertise some of the bands that aren't as well known. St. Vitus, great doom metal band. Phil also had all kinds of tattoos before tattoos were sort of a thing outside of heavy metal. So Phil was somewhat of a trendsetter, I guess you could say. Here's Deicide. Deicide, a death metal band out of Florida. Probably a little black metal in what they do too. Again, pretty basic, right? Lots of long hair. So this would be earlier Deicide because the Hoffman brothers are still in the band. So you can see lots of black jeans kind of going on. Some metal trinkets, I guess you might say. This would be sort of black metal art. The Glenn Benton, of course, sort of that sort of, those are his interests. So and that wasn't unusual too, to see crosses or upside down crosses or whatever. So you had those heavy metal accessories at times, but generally speaking, the guys kind of looking the same, and significantly too, many fans of these bands looked like this as well, right? Now here's Immortal. And the reason I put a picture of Immortal here is this isn't really the heavy metal uniform I'm talking about, right? This is Immortal. They are a black metal band from Norway. And you can see they wear the corpse paint. There's all kinds of really over the top spikes all over the place, and they got their weapons going on, etc. Like I say, this is for the stage, right? I'm pretty sure Immortal doesn't look like this all the time, right? Abat and Horg, I'm pretty sure they only wear their makeup and that sort of thing on the stage, I would think, right? So again, what I'm talking about by the metal uniform are the above examples, right? This would be over the top for the stage, much like Kiss or Alice Cooper wearing the makeup, etc. They don't wear these things generally in real life, but you get the sense that the way these guys look, and indeed their fans, this is how they look kind of all the time on stage or sort of in everyday life. So this is really what I'm talking about by the metal uniform. Okay, so I think you get the idea. Okay, let's go back to the paper. All right, so why were heavy metal fans and the bands wearing the metal uniform, right? Well, the rationale for donning the uniform was undoubtedly an expression of self-identity. I'm a metal fan, right? Any of those pictures we looked at, even if you didn't know that particular dude was a musician and creator or Pantera, etc. If you saw them, you would know, okay, heavy metal fan, right? It's just immediate. You would just know that, right? So it's an expression of self-identity. Also, it's a means of showing solidarity with like-minded bands or fans kind of thing. Again, it's just understood, right? If I'm walking around today, I'm proudly displaying the Metal Church emblem, right? If I'm walking around with Metal Church shirt on and my leather jacket and blue jeans, you don't even have to know me to know, okay, that guy's into heavy metal, right? And I guess long hair too, right? So again, it's just understood, right? But let me say this. It's not that every heavy metal fan wore the uniform, so to speak, that I'm kind of wearing today, you could say, right? Lots of heavy metal fans didn't have long hair particularly, or maybe only wore black t-shirts once in a while kind of thing, right? And then some heavy metal fans, didn't wear the uniform at all, okay? But the point I'm making is whether you wore the uniform or not, the uniform was completely understood. As I was saying, you see somebody wearing a Slayer shirt and has pretty long hair and I don't mean attractive long hair, just kind of long hair, right? And jeans, etc. Okay, heavy metal fan. It was just understood. Okay. Of course, a coordinated fashion approach is not just specific to heavy metal. So I'm not just saying it's just metal fans, right? Punk has its look, certainly did, still kind of does. Grunge had its look, right? Like back in Seattle when that scene was developing. Country and Western has a look, right? Disco, dance music has its look, etc. So other types of music certainly have their get-ups as well, right? I think heavy metal is second to none, though, when it comes to that the uniform is just so universally understood, right? I mean, we're basically walking billboards for the bands we like, You know, I don't think any other genre of music is that blatant in sort of, you know, advertising the artists that we admire, right? But not all forms of music do this, right? If you look at prog rock, do prog rock fans and bands have a look? I don't think so, right? Do jazz people have a look? Not really, or certainly not something that's as strongly identifiable as heavy metal, for instance. And by heavy metal, I'm also sort of including too hard rock, because the two are fairly similar, I think, in the look. How about blues? Are blues fans identifiable by their look or their fashion? Yeah, not really. I don't think so. So this is sort of where I'm getting at in this essay. It sort of begs the question, would heavy metal have been better served without adherence to a unified and widely recognized look, right? For one thing, it's likely that heavy metal and indeed hard rock would have gained wider respect without the uniform, right? I mean, we have the uniform, it is what it is, but I think it has actually hurt heavy metal in particular, gaining respect from sort of the wider audiences, if you like. You know, to a lot of people, I'm sure the look looks kind of simple, maybe a little bit sloppy, right? And people might think, well, you don't have to do a whole lot of thinking to have the heavy metal look. You all kind of look the same, right? So how sophisticated, how elaborate can the music really be, right? So again, I think that's a really lazy argument. Others might levy against heavy metal, say, well, the music can't be all good because look at the way they look, kind of thing, right? But nevertheless, I don't think the look does the music of heavy metal any favors in terms of trying to sort of get across how sophisticated the music really is, right? But that to me is kind of a minor thing. I think the potential dangers of the metal uniform go much deeper than concern over what others might think. Because at the end of the day, let's face it, most heavy metal fans don't worry too much about what other people think. It could and probably should be viewed as an instrument of conformity that encourages the music to drift towards mediocrity. And I think it does. And I'm going to really build that argument. Really, I guess it's later in the paper and really in part 2 of my YouTube presentations. And again, this isn't just a benign sort of thing that we all kind of wear the metal uniform. Many of us do wear the metal uniform, and it's just a look we like. That actually, I think it can be problematic for the music in ways that I'm going to get to. Okay, so as such, the deep, free-thinking, fearless, boundary-pushing ethic exhibited by the musicianship and songcraft of many metal bands, and indeed hard rock bands, but especially metal bands, I would say. And I would argue are only rivaled by elite jazz and prog artists, right? I think all of that sophistication is put at risk anytime the uniform is given too much weight, right? I think there really is a concern there. Arguably, the metal uniform's ability to override or at least rival musical expression has softened in contemporary times. I'm going to get to this as well. And I think newer generations of metal fans are a whole lot better dealing with this, right, than I think my generation has been. But I still think it's there. I still think the metal uniform, even today, can be a detriment to the music in ways that I'll get to. Okay. So I'm gonna sort of again continue to set this argument up, but now we're gonna look specifically at the biggest heavy metal band on the planet by most measures, Metallica's musical and fashion sense journey. So maybe you've never really looked at Metallica quite this way, but so it'd be interesting to get some comments if people think I'm completely out of my mind on this, or if you think maybe I'm onto something. Okay, well. The importance of Metallica to heavy metal is indisputable. Even if you're not particularly a Metallica fan, you can't dispute how important this band has been to heavy metal and hard rock, really. That does not mean that their entire career has been perceived as uniformly brilliant, right? There's a lot of Metallica fans that only like certain parts of their musical output, right? I happen to be, I'll get my biases out of the way right off the bat here. I'm somebody who kind of likes all eras of Metallica, right? I find something to enjoy with really every Metallica album that's ever been put out, like the studio albums. And then there's a lot of live stuff I love too, right? But I certainly understand, and I might even be in the minority there. I certainly understand there's many Metallica fans that have a real problem with some of their musical changes over time, which we're going to get to. But the central argument I'm going to make in this Metallica section is that the importance of Metallica's evolving fashion, the way they looked, right, seemed to supersede the merits of their musical changes. And I would argue anytime that happens, that's a problem, right? Literally, it was not change in the music that garnered the most reaction, especially from Metallica's core following, but deviance from the metal uniform, right? And again, you might not have realized this, but I think as you go through this, especially if you live through a lot of Metallica's changes, I think you're going to see that there is I believe there is something to this. Okay. So with respect to the music, I'm not going to go through and analyze every album. That's been done a million times. There's a lot of cool websites you can look to, right? It can give you a much more in-depth view of each of Metallica's albums and the style that they're employing, et cetera, et cetera. Or better yet, listen to them yourself, right? Because I mean, especially those early Metallica albums, they are absolutely required listening. So if there are metal fans out there that haven't heard, say, the first 4 Metallica albums, I mean, start digging in, my friends. You got to check this. But I know many of you are very familiar with this stuff. So like I say, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. I just want to point out the musical changes that have occurred from album to album. And then I'm going to sort of link that with Metallica's appearance as that has changed from album to album. Okay. So actually, let's go and have a look. Before I kind of dig into the essay again, let's look at Metallica. The way they looked through Metallica through the years, the way they looked. Okay, so here we are. So here's, again, I'm just sort of picking one picture. Typically, their pictures associated with the albums of that time that are sort of indicative, though, of what Metallica looked like as we went through their career. So here they are sort of at the beginning of Kill 'Em All, the 1983-84 album. And you can see, so we've got, they all look pretty young for one thing, but they're all very much sporting the metal uniform, or at least from what we can make out, right? James Hetfield in particular, as we're going to see other pictures of James, especially early on, James Hetfield to me was the epitome of the metal uniform. And given Metallica's influence, I guess it's not surprising that so many metal fans ended up, looking like James Hetfield in so many ways. The long hair, the black leather jacket. Oh, the cutoff jean jacket over top of a black leather jacket. That was really metal. And lots of people, I used to actually sport that myself. I guess I was sort of following James myself. I don't know. Lars, again, looking, not quite as metal as James maybe here, but again, the long hair, emphasis on black. Kirk, certainly, again, note the pins and the patches, here's a Venom pin that we can see. I think he's got a Michael Schenker thing happening here or something like that. But again, advertising bands, lots of black, lots of leather. Cliff Burton too, right? So here they are at their next album, still looking mighty metal, sporting the metal uniform at Ride the Lightning, their second album. Again, James, again, the epitome of the metal uniform again. So note the high cut running shoes, right? The tight either blue or black jeans. Again, you got James wearing the leather jacket with the jean jacket over top, the long hair, having a beer, etc. Here's Kurt, again, looking pretty darn metal as well, looking very much like James there. Cliff Burton, I always, Cliff maybe always looked a little more hard rock perhaps than metal at times because he was always big into denim. Maybe at times looking a little more Aerosmithy than metal at times, but there was no mistaking. And again, that's sort of my point. Whether you knew these guys were in a heavy metal band or you knew they were in Metallica or whatever, you knew, it was immediate, right? Okay, these guys are into metal or hard rock, etc. You wouldn't even have to know who they are or their music or anything, right? Just the look was immediate. I would say more so than any other type of music. The uniform is just boom. You just know whether you're a fan or not. Right. And so here they are at their third album, Master of Puppets, still looking mighty metal, maybe a little more color here and there. But again, so James, this is, I don't know if you remember now, lots of people wear ripped up Levi's and jeans, but but that probably started with heavy metal around this time too. So again, James wearing a Misfits t-shirt, lots of leather, lots of long hair, right? Cliff again, big into the denim and still all kinds of long hair, etc. Here they are at their fourth album, Injustice for All. Again, still looking mighty metal. Here, James, black shades too were often a key accessory in the metal uniform. So that you often saw that, right? Now we have Jason Newsted, who replaces Cliff Burton. Sadly, Cliff, of course, dies, is killed tragically after Master of Puppets. So here's Jason again, sporting Sacred Reich t-shirt, great thrash metal band as well. James again, Danzig here. Again, looking pretty metal. And again, often the black t-shirts too were cut off. So that was pretty usual too, right? Again, no big change there. And here they are at the Black Album. Again, no big change. They're still pretty much, you know, lots of black. Well, Lars is wearing white this time, but again, lots of hair, advertising different. While this time Jason is advertising his own band, but again, black t-shirts with concert logos, etc. Kirk all in black with the shades on, etc. And then, whoa, here's Load, right? Now check out the fashion choices here, right? So again, we got, and it kind of works out. We got James here, we got Lars here, we got Kirk, and we got Jason, right? Very different. Here's where we have a decided shift in their fashion. And again, this is really significant, which I'm going to, when we get back to the essay, you're going to see why, right? But right up to the Black Album, the fifth album, Metallica sported the metal uniform, I think without a doubt, right? And then suddenly, boom, at the time of Load, no. Okay, what can we note here just from a couple pictures? And by the way, this is on the back of Load too. So this is exactly, you know, how they wanted to be displayed. Well, James, well, probably the first thing you notice, all the hair's gone, right? They all cut their hair, right? Okay. And not only did they cut their hair, they're actually styling their hair. Look at James here doing some styling going on, etc. Right? Note the color in fact, they're collared shirts. They're not, nobody's got a concert tee on, you know, advertising the Misfits or Danzig or anything like that. Lars and Kirk in particular are showing lots of color with collars and all kinds of. Note the hat, not a cap, you know, showing Slayer or something. This is a full-blown hat kind of thing, right? Big change, right? And then you got Load and Reload, which are sort of companion discs, if you like. And here they're not looking real metal either, right? I mean, especially when you consider the eyeliner that they're wearing and stuff like that, right? I mean, it's one thing to wear eyeliner and exaggerate it like Alice Cooper. It's another to wear eyeliner to, you know, this. Here they're looking more new wave than they are heavy metal, I think, right? Okay. So all of this matters, I believe. All right. So that was sort of what Metallica looked like through. I'll get to what they look like, you know, in later albums too. But this is sort of a good place to pause and kind of link it with then how was the music changing versus the fashion, right? And you're going to see I'm going to build to something here. The incredible backlash that occurs against Metallica around Load, I believe, had a whole lot more to do with how they looked than how the albums actually sound. Okay, see if you buy this. So anyway, quickly going through the music. So when we go, how did the music change between album 1 and album 2? So I hear personally a little bit of a stylistic change between Kill 'Em All and Ride the Lightning between the two albums, right? I mean, Kill 'Em All maybe a little thrashier, a little more primitive. Ride the Lightning, there's a little more emphasis, a little more on epic songs, that kind of thing. But really, I don't think there's a huge shift in the music. There's probably a significant shift in some ways too, because Dave Mustaine had a lot of influence on the first album, and obviously by the second album, he's not around. I mean, he never played on the first album, Kill 'Em All, of course, but he co-writes a whole bunch of stuff on that. So there might have been there. But my point is, musically, yeah, there's a shift between Kill 'Em All and Ride the Lightning, but I don't think it's massively significant. Musically, I don't think there's hardly any shift between the second album and the third, between Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets. The big change would be the production. So the production's a little crisper, you know, probably a little punchier on the bass side on Master of Puppets compared to Ride the Lightning. But as far as song structures are concerned, the two albums are almost identical. I mean, they start off with a really fast thrashy tune. They go to the title track, which is a bit of a slow down, but still pretty thrashy. Then they have the real doomy, super heavy third track. And then the fourth track is the building epic. So the two albums, I mean, if you A-B them, they're almost the same stylistically in terms of songs. Both amazing albums. I mean, this is not a criticism by any respect, but I've always heard album 2 and album 3 stylistically is basically totally in the same ballpark. And then by the time we get to the fourth album, And Justice for All, again, I'm not hearing a big shift between, say, Master of Puppets, the third album, and And Justice for All. Yes, there's more emphasis on longer songs, epics, etc. Arguably, it's Metallica at their most technical. It's also their no bass album kind of thing. But again, the song structures, to me, we're not talking quantum leaps here, right? I think the difference between Master of Puppets and Justice for All is really quite small. They're still basically playing the same type of, admittedly, incredibly great music, right? No big change there. And however, by the time we get to the Black Album, which of course is just having its big anniversary right now, and you can get the massive expanded versions of it, et cetera, et cetera. The Black Album was by far Metallica's big commercial breakthrough, right? The Black Album came out in 91 and it reached a massive audience. It's still by far Metallica's biggest selling album. In fact, it's one of the biggest selling albums of all time. And no question, a big part of the album's massive commercial success coincided with Metallica's most significant musical shift in their esteemed career. I think there's a huge difference musically between the Black Album and what came before. That's the biggest stylistic shift Metallica ever had. So for specifics, again, you can check other websites. If you're not familiar with the Black Album, it's been reviewed to death, or again, better just listen to it yourself. But suffice to say, those even casually acquainted with Metallica's work, I'm sure you'll concede that the Black Album featured much simpler songs, much catchier songs, much more conventional production aesthetics, a big pullback from sort of technical, epic type songs, etc. Now, is the Black Album better or worse than what came before? I mean, I won't even get into that argument right now. Lots of people have strong opinions there. That's subjective and it's a matter of taste. But I think what's not debatable is that the music changed quite profoundly, between the Black Album and everything that came before, right? Metallica evolves all the time. I'm not saying that their albums are the same. But, if the incremental change in music between, say, the first two albums is like this, albums 2 and 3, I think, were even smaller. Albums 4 and 5, maybe like this. And then albums, between the Black Album and everything else, I think was like that, like just massive change is what I'm saying. Now, whether you like it better or not, hey, that's subjective. But I don't think you can dispute musically there was a big change, right? It's also really important to note that at the time of the Black Album, their big commercial breakthrough, right? That Metallica strongly adhered to the metal uniform. They still looked by and large the same. They still wore jeans, leather. They still had the concert tees advertising all kinds of bands, right? They still had the long hair, okay? So from the Black Album all the way back, Metallica wore the metal uniform, right? Which again, as we said, long hair, ripped jeans, black leather, heavy metal group tees, all of that, right? Now, again, in fairness, there was some backlash musically to the Black Album. There were some parts of their fan base that just said, you know what, you're conforming too much here musically. I'm kind of off the train, right? Or at least they just grumbled a lot about it, right? But any resentment directed towards Metallica at the point of the Black Album was minuscule compared to what happened with Load and Reload. I have never in my life, and I've followed heavy metal for a long time and hard rock, witnessed the backlash that Metallica took by and large from their own fans when they released Load and then Reload. I always put Load and Reload together, as most people do, because both those albums came really from the same session, right? Now this, and again, the backlash was negative largely. Metallica fans hated Load. Like, I mean, I've never seen so much hostility Chill out, dude. But I've never seen so much hostility in my life. You know, it was just amazing how much heat the band took for putting out this Load album, right? Now, admittedly, some of that hostility has subsided over the years. Some people have gone back and listened to it with new ears, say, oh, okay, maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. Or, of course, new fans are getting into Metallica all the time, and they might be viewing Load and Reload through a different perspective than if you sort of lived through it, right? Now, again, I know everybody's going to kind of assimilate this music differently, right? But for me, and I don't, you know, again, maybe there's a little bit of controversy here with what I'm going to say, but I don't hear a huge difference musically between Load, Reload, and the Black Album. Yeah, there's a change. I'm not saying they're identical albums stylistically, but again, I would say the difference musically between Load, Reload, and the Black Album is small, right? The difference between the Black Album and Justice for All Master of Puppets is massive. All right. That's sort of the point I'm making here. Again, so how can, you know, just musically comparing the Black Album and Load and Reload, most of the songs are simple. All right. Again, just think back or listen to these albums again if you're not believing me on this. They're simple, especially by Metallica's standards. There's an emphasis on hooks and groove. I remember Lars making a big deal about it this time, saying, you know, I'm not really that interested in being a technical drummer anymore. I want to be in the pocket. I want to be groovy, that sort of thing, right? And all of these albums are propelled by really state-of-the-art production, right? The Black Album, Load, and Reload are further united by an almost complete absence of thrash metal. Right? I mean, you can find all kinds of examples of thrash metal in the first three albums. In fact, they're dominated by thrash, you know, really speedy kind of music, basically. And of course, thrash metal, Metallica was part of pioneering that along with Slayer, Anthrax, Megadeth, Exodus, etc. Right? But on the Black Album, Load and Reload, I don't think there's really any thrash metal. I mean, maybe Holier Than Thou, you know, maybe a little bit here and there. Struggle Within, maybe, I don't know, but but to me that's power metal at best. There really isn't much thrash going on. And also, all three of those albums are united by the songwriting influence of producer Bob Rock, who clearly had an influence on the band. Bob Rock produced their breakthrough album, the Black Album. He also produces Load and Reload, okay, and he was very much a hands-on producer. He had nothing to do with the production of the previous four albums. So again, there's so much uniting those albums really musically, right? So here's kind of my point. Those who abandon Metallica after Injustice for All, I mean, I think we can understand why. It would be distaste for the band's musical direction, right? However, there's a whole lot of fans out there, old Metallica fans, newer fans, whatever, that thought the Black Album was like the greatest thing. I mean, the numbers don't lie, right? How much it sold, right? Yet we're indifferent or completely hostile to Load and Reload, right? But I'm making the argument, musically, those albums aren't that different. If you're looking at those albums purely from a musical standpoint, if you love the Black Album, I can't really see how you absolutely hate Load. You might not like it as well, and that's totally fine. But to think the Black Album's awesome and Load is just completely terrible, that's always been a big puzzle to me. Well, not really, because I think I know what happened. But musically, they're not that different, right? So you're either in or you're out to some degree, I would say, right? I think the reason the backlash to Load was so intense is because Metallica changed their look, their fashion. I.e., this is where we got a little shallow, folks. That's the argument I'm making. So coinciding with the very high-profile release of Load was an almost complete abandonment of the metal uniform, so proudly displayed by Metallica up until that point, right? And again, as we looked at in the pictures, at the time of Load, they weren't wearing the metal uniform at all, right? Colored shirts with collars, wide brim hats, they all cut their hair, all that sort of thing. In the case of James, who to me was the poster boy of the metal uniform, you know, really, I can't think of anybody who looked more metal than James. At the time of Load, completely abandoned. He had a slick back greaser look that looked not unlike a 1950s Goodfella. I mean, well, that's how I saw him. Maybe that's not entirely what he was going for, but that's how it looked to me, right? So these fashion choices were clearly not intended to lead the metal community into new territory, as obviously they've always done musically. No, this was a blatant declaration of style. The fact that they all went the same direction at the same time should tell you that this was calculated, right? And actually, Metallica at the time of Load looked way more new wave than they did metal, I would say by far. It was a clear statement to detach from the metal uniform, right? Lars, the drummer, continued to do a lot of the band's press at the time. And while sporting a very unmetal look, was far more likely to name drop Oasis. I don't know if you remember back then, but Lars was all over Oasis. Oasis is not a metal band by any stretch. Again, if James was the poster boy for the metal uniform, Lars was the poster boy for championing heavy metal bands. I mean, this guy was once the highest profile champion of the new wave of British heavy metal. You know, this guy was championing, you know, bands like Diamond Head and Angel Witch and Samson and Saxon. Like when he was a kid, he used to follow these bands around in Europe and he used to talk them up like crazy, right? Like he was Mr. Metal, you know, and talking about especially more underground metal bands, right? Now he talks about Oasis looking and completely non-metal while he's doing it, right? Jason Newsted, perhaps the new bassist or newer bassist, perhaps anticipating or reacting to the backlash around Load, reminded fans at the time that there are numerous other thrash bands around. So in effect, go listen to them if you don't really like our direction. So it's sort of like, well, if you're not liking this kind of, you know, you can listen to somebody else, right? So what do we got here at the time of Load? Heavy metal's most important band seemed to lose their enthusiasm for promoting metal, and actually might be even talking down to us a little bit, right? And crucially, no longer looked metal, right? So the backlash, boom, boom, boom. What's Metallica doing? I'm going nuts here. What are they doing at Load, right? Many metal fans just saw this as abandonment, pure and simple. But musically, was it? Okay, that's the key thing here. I don't think Metallica abandoned anybody musically. If you like the Black Album, okay? If the Black Album was too commercial for you, fair enough. Then musical direction as a fan was your problem. But if you loved the Black Album and hated Load, I don't think you were part of that backlash. I think it was all about that Metallica changed their look, not the music, right? Unquestionably, Load and then a year later Reload, right, had nothing to do with thrash metal, no question. But then, as I said, or complicated song structures, but then neither did the Black Album. Okay, that ship had already sailed, right? So although a far cry from the intensity of Metallica's first 4 albums, I would make the argument that songs on Load and Reload are actually more aggressive than pretty much anything on the Black Album. And they're certainly more multifaceted, right? I mean, again, think if you've never listened to these, check them out. I do think they're pretty good songs. Album closers on Load and Reload, respectively, The Outlaw, Torn, and Fixer. These are pretty complicated songs. They remind me more, you know, going back, you know, those particular songs. At least they had the feel of being more of an epic kind of thing. I don't feel any of that on the Black Album, right? A lot of people make a fuss over Load and Reload had some ballads on it, right? Mama Said, there were others too. And yeah, okay, I get it. If you're somebody who really likes the hard and heavy stuff, ballads are going to throw you, right? But again, what did the Black Album have? Nothing Else Matters. I don't think there's anything sappier in Metallica's catalog, right? Even The Unforgiven, you know, that's pretty sappy too. Again, I'm not saying they're necessarily bad songs, but to beat up Load and Reload because they have ballads, well, the Black Album had them too, right? So one could then justly deduce that it was the unmetal image the band was projecting that caused the most consternation around the time of Load and Reload. Because again, the music really didn't change that much after And Justice for All. All right. Okay. So I think this is really, really important. When we give appearance too much weight, it ultimately hurts the music. And that's what I'm going to pick up on in part two, looking at the rest of this paper in my next YouTube presentation. I hope you will check that out. See you then.